topic is absolutely timely, and we've got two wonderful guests with us to speak on the topic of spring IEP season. We have Dr. David Bateman, who is a good friend and neighbor, and then Dr. Sean Smith, tuning in from across the country. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Bateman now, and then we'll be monitoring the chat and the question and answers in case there are things that we need to pop in. We will take attendance at the end of the session, so just sit back and engage and take in all that Dr. Bateman and Dr. Smith have to offer. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Let me get my screen set up. Not sure what's happening here. For some reason, it's not sharing like I want to. All right, so my first, I just want to highlight the fact that I appreciate all of you being here. And I'm just trying to figure out why you are here and why you're here, because it's really nice outside. And if you get a chance to go outside, I strongly encourage you to go outside and do something. If you need to run around without clothes on, you have my permission, because it's one of the first really nice warm days that we've had in Pennsylvania. I'm in my cave where I can hear that there's people outside doing fun things, but please just go outside. Second thing is I hope you saw the news that the Biden administration is pushing to have teachers, K-12 teachers, at least get their first dose of the vaccine by the end of this month. I sincerely hope that you are able to get that and hope that it works for you. My daughter works in a school for kids with autism, and she was able to get her first dose. And so it's working well. So hopefully we can get this, and hopefully you can receive and accrue the benefits of this. The third thing, for those of you who are unaware, is that this weekend we change time and we change our clocks. And so with spring forward, you will lose an hour of sleep this weekend. And just in the interest of full disclosure, Monday is going to be hard to teach. It truly is. It's going to be difficult. The kids are not preparing for this. What we should be doing with these kids is for the 12 days away from time change is change the clocks by 5 minutes, so we're all in line, like my friend who's a dairy farmer does. But it's going to be tough. So good luck to all of you. Today we're going to be talking about educationally appropriate IEPs and kind of emphasizing the purpose of this and going from this. I think the description originally said legally compliant IEPs. We're not giving you legal advice. We're just trying to talk about what can we do to ensure that the child receives the progress and the program to which they're entitled, and helps that child move forward. That's our goal, and that's what we should be striving for, and that's what we're seeking as a part of this. Okay, so I'm gonna do some basics on this. Then I'll get to some more in depth on this. And it's not to talk down to you, but just kind of move forward as we talk about this. Remember, the IDEA has some basic key concepts. Our obligation, and those of you we've worked with, and I've seen, I've been part of your school district and done things, is I push to make sure that kids receive an appropriate education, the whole faith. And so these are the key concepts: that special education and related services that we provide to these kids is services that we can support them and benefit, and then there's a program and there's opportunities for them to receive an appropriate education as it's outlined in the IEP. So when I'm involved in lawsuits, and just in the interest of full disclosure, I've not been involved in a lawsuit for about 3 hours now. So I've heard me say that, but it really is true. About 3 hours ago, I was working a lawsuit. We were looking at the child's IEP and looking where we are with this. So keep that in mind as we talk about this, and we keep in where we are with this. All right. So these are our key concepts: FAPE, LRE, and the IEP. All right. So wait, there's more. Right. So what I want you to think about, and I want you to strongly consider, is I want you to strongly consider the FAPE requirements, and talk about this and what we have as a part of this, and make sure that you are addressing this, and make sure we're paying attention to this, and we're addressing this appropriately for all kids. Okay. And this is interesting, because as you guys are getting ready for IEP season, I want to make sure that you're following you're following the procedures, and that you're paying attention to the procedures, and you're addressing the procedures, and you're looking at this. So as the IEP team, is what we're doing, is what we're showing, Is it something that is, have we paid attention to the procedures? Have we paid attention to the procedures? Have we paid attention to what's going on? Have we paid attention to where we are with this? So it's important part of what we're doing, and we want to make sure that you're doing this. This is why your special ed directors hound you to make sure that you have the T's crossed, the I's dotted, and you have the right people in the room. So keep that in mind as we talk about that. Substantive is the IEP, and look at this, so it's 3 parts. Procedural, substantive, and implementation. Is the IEP reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress? And if the child is not making progress, then we need to do something different. And I'll talk about this in a little bit, but I want to make sure that we emphasize this, that we address where we are with this. And then implementation. We can write these wonderful, wonderful, grand, glorious IEPs, but if we don't implement the little suckers, it doesn't count for much. And I really do mean this. So pay very close attention to implementation. So if you're an administrator, what I recommend is you periodically meet with the teachers and make sure that they're doing and poll a few of these IEPs. You're like an internal compliance is that you poll a few teachers and ask them, let's go through some IEPs. Is this child getting this level of services? Is this child getting this level of assistance? What's going on as a part of this? Make sure that you're implementing what's going on as a part of this. Keep that in mind. So let me focus on procedures real fast. All right, just going to show you this. All right. And this is a slide I borrow from my friends at AIR. And so this is, and just biking is what I do. It's some of you do curling, some of you do walking, some of you do other things. Biking is what I do. This is a bike that's been taken apart. And so what you have here, just the standard parts of the bike. And you can see this like this. But I want to compare this analogy, and this is not my analogy. I'm borrowing this, but I use it and I modified it ever so slightly. But think about all the parts, and pay attention to this, because many of you use either IEP Writer or Sapphire to work on your IEPs, and you don't see the big picture. Similar to how many of you are doing your taxes. If you use TurboTax to do your taxes, what you're doing is you see the parts, but you don't see the big thing until the very end when you pay the money. So think about this. You have all these parts, and things like this. And if those who are bike aficionados, you're looking at this, and there's some things that are missing. Yes, we're missing the cables, but it's DI2, so we're okay. So keep that in mind. All right. So as part of program development, what we have, all right, we have the present levels. We have the present levels, kind of there that kind of get this thing, the whole thing spinning. Then you have the goals, and then you have the specially designed instruction, and then you have the measurable goals, and then you have the monitoring plan, and then you have the bike. And here's the bike. All right, it's a beauty. It's very similar to the one I race on, but it's interesting about this. This is what the bike looks like, and things like this. And as a part of the bike, I want you to think about this. First, you have the present levels. That's the front of the bike. That's what moves the bike forward. That's what moves the IEP program forward. Second, you have the measurable goals. And we have these things, and we make sure that we're connects to our PLAF and other things as we're making progress. Third, we have the and Commonwealth, we have the SDI, this addresses the unique needs and ensures access and progress to the general curriculum. And then last, we have a monitoring plan. We have a monitoring plan because without a monitoring plan, you don't have anything. And it's interesting, you think that'd be at the tail end, but it's all part of the whole process. And so what I want you to keep in mind is yes, I do have a time trial bike that looks very similar to this felt here, but I want you can pay attention is whatever meets your needs. It's the importance of individualization. It's the importance of individualization, and we need to rely on this because there are some individuals who need a 3-wheel bike. There's some individuals who need to ride a tandem. We need to pay attention to this. So keep this in mind as we're addressing this, and keep this in mind as we're paying attention to the level of services that we provide for kids, and keep that as we focus. Wait more on individualization, and this is an important part, right? Is I just real quickly, Sean or Ethan, am I blocking the screen with my picture?
No, you're good.
Okay, thank you. All right. We in Congress didn't find appropriate, but instead we established a baseline mechanism with a written document called the IEP. All right. The purpose of this is to reach an agreement. This is from 1978. Some of you don't even remember 1978. We don't remember 1978. 78 was a good year. Some of you don't remember 1978. Please do not put that in the chat because that just pisses me off. But it's interesting is that 1978 was a good year, but we've had this. This is not a new thing. This is not a new thing. It's the basis for what we're doing here. So keep that in mind as we talk about that. Now, some of you in other locations have heard me talk about the Supreme Court ruling, which is almost exactly 4 years ago, all right? 11 days shy of 4 years ago, right? Where whether you like the Supreme Court or not, the Supreme Court, in a rare unanimous decision, said to meet its substantive obligations under the IDEA, a school must offer an IEP that reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So you need to make sure kids are making progress. And I'll show you some graphs in a few minutes from a due process hearing I was involved in on Monday, where the kid is, I'll let you make that determination about whether they're making progress. But it's interesting about this, but that is our focus, and that's what we need to pay attention to. So as I said this before, and this is basically all IEPs, all things need to be judged based on this two-part test. First, has the state complied with the procedures set forth in the law? We touched that briefly a few minutes ago, where we talked about the crossing of the T's, dotting the I's, making sure that we have the right people in the room and you have the right things there. Second, and this is the more nebulous one, and this is the one that is tripping up individuals, is the resulting IEP reasonably calculated to enable the student to make progress appropriate in light of his or her circumstances. That's not my words, that's the Supreme Court's words. So keep that in mind as we talk about this, but that's what our focus is. And that's what we need to think about this. And that's what we need to pay attention to and address. Okay, wait, there's more. Okay, so the IEP must enable the child. I've highlighted some words here. Maybe you can tell which words I think are important. You do that on your own. There might be a subgroup that'll help you with this. Okay, to make the child to make progress, but the essential function of the IEP is pay attention to this. It's not just academic achievement, it's also functional advancement. It's functional advancement. I can't emphasize this enough, is that we need to strive to encourage kids to make functional advancement in their curriculum so that they understand, so that we understand exactly what's going on with them so we can improve the services. Academics are important, but that's not everything. Too often when I review IEPs as part of due process hearings, we have kids with all sorts of behavioral issues, social skill issues, and there's nothing in the IEP that addresses this, despite the fact that all through the PLAF statement, the kid is having significant problems with this. So you need to make sure that we're addressing this and we're paying attention to this and you are focusing on this as a part of this, okay? So wait, there's more, this is, and then more. I'm just kind of laying the foundation for this. Is the U.S. Department of Education said, after as a result of the Endrew Supreme Court case, is that the primary focus of the IEP is to make sure that it needs the individual needs of the child, not the individual needs of your school district, not the individual needs of the classroom, not the individual needs of what's going on. You need to make sure that it's based on the needs of that child. Because the term that we often use, if like, for instance, we have a kid who has a disability, and then we've tried to figure out to develop we have a program down the hall that may not be right for the kid, but we have a spot in that program. We have a spot in that program. We work to provide that program for the child. That program, even though it's not appropriate, we send the child there because we have a spot. That the technical term for that is called shoehorning. We shoehorn the kid into a program where they may not necessarily need to pay attention to. So keep that as we talk about this. I'm going to touch real quickly on the procedural and substantive parts of this, and then go into more on IEP implementation. But pay attention to this as we go through this. Okay, procedural, substantive, and implementation requirements. The guidance that I'm going to be giving you stems from all the due process hearings and litigation that I've been involved in just in the past 3 years. When I was the hearing officer for the Commonwealth, yes, I also saw these things, but these are the things that really I need to pay attention to, and we'll get to hopefully some tips at the end as we work on this, okay? Endrew continues Rowley's focus. So if you've been a director of special education and working in school districts for years, the process of the IEP development has not changed. But the IEP itself must be drafted in compliance with a detailed set of procedures. And so think about it as a procedural document, not as just a compliance document. Think about the process that goes into this, that you're going to be gathering information about this. And so you need to pay attention to this as a part of this and putting together a program for a child. So here are some examples of some procedural requirements. Make sure that you've obtained informed parental consent, not just partial parental consent. Just to remember that as a part of parental consent can be withdrawn at any point. It's not a permanent structure. Keep that in mind as we talk about that. Did you involve the students' parents in the development, monitoring, and enforcement of their IEP? That the parents are fully kept aware of what's going on. This is one thing that I'm seeing, and I'll show you, the graph I'll show you in a few minutes will highlight this. Where the parents are not aware of what's going on in the child's program. They're not kept aware and they're not asked as a part of this. Keep that as we talk about this. You cannot, and I mean this, you cannot go too overboard in the amount of information that you provide the parents. Keep the parents fully informed of what's going on. Next, third, you also meet the state and federal timelines. The timelines, okay? So then let's put it out here. Is it parent may not come into a meeting, and it's gotten easier through the Zoom machine to get parents involved in these IEP meetings. But as many of you know, I live in Carlisle, and we have a lot of Amazon warehouses in Carlisle, as you do up by where else you have some up by Truxtertown. And so in Brenningsville, but you have these warehouses, and parents are working long hours and they're having to take time from their shift on the warehouses to participate in this. So it's gotten easier, but make sure that you keep the parents there and get the parents involved. But there are some parents who are not returning the notices, they're not participating. You cannot change a child's program or placement without this. Now, what does this mean for a child who is going from like a elementary to a middle school? That the child would naturally progress with their age appropriate peers, but they would continue to receive the same level of services as they progress from one building to another. So it doesn't mean they're going to stay in the same building, but they're naturally going to continue to receive services at the same level, because that's the last agreed upon program that we have as a part of this. Right? That you have the required IEP team members, not just the IEP team member, like not just the general education teacher who happens to be free that period. You actually have the general education teacher who works with this kid and knows what this kid looks like. Make sure that you have that and keep that. You include all the required IEP components, and that has gotten easier as we talk about the use of IEP Writer and Sapphire. You have those, but you need to make sure that they are there, and you look at the very end, similar to when I do TurboTax, which my wife refuses to let me do anymore, but I use that. I'm going to anyway. But it's interesting is that you don't see the final picture before at the very end when you actually submit. And the last, monitoring and reporting progress. I'm seeing a lot of districts not monitoring what's going on, or they're just doing casual monitoring. And so this is part of the IEP development, is you need to make sure that you're doing appropriate monitoring of what's going on with the kid. And when I say appropriate monitoring, that you're taking data on these kids on a regular basis. You've heard me go off on this. I'm going to do it again since we have way more participants today than we typically have. But I'm asking for districts to have multiple data points per marking period. Multiple data points, like 7 to 10 data points, so you have some trend on, understand what's going on, and then you're actually then reporting to the parents the progress, so that we have the parents really have a clear understanding, not just using the drop-down menus that you have on the reports on some of your grade reports where you say kid is doing good. Yeah, you need to give me some data. You need to give me some data so I understand precisely what's going on with this child and pay attention to this. So keep that in mind. Wait, there's more. Substantive requirements, okay? The IEP is the centerpiece of the law's educational delivery system. Great thing, things like this. And the substantive side of the IEP focuses on the adequacy of the IEP in terms of its likely or actual results. Many of you know Perry Zerkel. So he wrote this a few years ago, and it does help us clarify where we are with this. But it's like it gives it emphasis on the results. Now, some things that I'm seeing, substantive requirements that you need to pay attention to, right? That you're conducting individualized assessments of all the students' needs. All the needs. I should put that in capitals and circle that in bright red. We're checking on everything that's going on with this child, all the potential needs this child has. We're including relevant information from the assessments in the PLAF. So your present levels is first. It's first. I'm going to make sure that your present levels are present. I was involved in an IEP right in the pre-times, right before COVID hit, which for those of you who understand was about a year ago. If you haven't been keeping track, think about what we've learned in this past year. What I share this with you is they had a great present. They'd taken a lot of great information for this child's information from the ER, put it into the PLAF statement, and then they used the same exact statement for 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and 7th grade. The P of PLAF means present. The first P stands for present. So I want to make sure that we are getting present levels, current information. Without current information, you do not have an accurate PLAF. If you don't have an accurate PLAF, it throws into balance the rest of the IEP, whether the rest of the IEP is appropriate for the child. So some of you have heard me say this before. I rely on school psychologists to help aggregate this data and things like this. I think I've said before, hug your school psychologist, make sure you support your school psychologist, do what you can to provide supports for them and help this, but make sure that we're getting this. Then, as a part of this, you're developing measurable goals, measurable goals. And I'm not saying this is a pun, but if you can't measure it, it don't count. It doesn't count. I just did things like this. And you have to make sure that the goal is appropriate to the child, and not just some goal that everyone does. I mean, I was working in an IEP 2 years ago where the kid had a typing goal. There was nothing in his present level statement that said anything about fine motor problems or typing. And I asked the school about this, and the school said everyone has a typing goal. Everyone is not this child. We're talking about individualized for this child, not for the school, for this child. Make sure it pays attention directly to this. So when I do IEP reviews, and I've been doing a lot of IEP reviews of districts of late because of the explosion in litigation, not just in Pennsylvania, but in other states. The first thing I do is I look at the present level statement. I then identify all the specific needs a child has, and then I go through the IEP and I make sure the IEP covers that. And we'll get to this in a second about implementation, but we either have to have a goal, an SDI, or for the older kids, a transition statement in the Commonwealth that addresses one of these three things. Without that, it doesn't flow. And then I go backwards, make sure for every goal, there's got to be a goal, there's got to be a need. If there's not a need, then we get rid of that goal. So it goes two ways on this. And so I'm seeing a lot of districts not doing this and paying attention to this, right? Then adopting services based on peer-reviewed research, as opposed to just the teacher who just reviews or makes up things. I want to see evidence, because if I'm going to help you get ready for witness preparation, I'm going to say, where did you get your data? Where did you get your information to determine that this is an appropriate program to be using for a kid with this type of disability? If you don't have anything, I'm not sure if we're going to go on a witness stand. We're going to probably have to settle that, because your witness stand experience is going to really suck otherwise. And I want to emphasize this as a part of this. And if you say you got your information from teacher paying teachers, that's not going to do it for me. All right, that may be great stuff, but I need more valid stuff from this. And then last, you are monitoring and reporting students' progress on their goals and objectives. You are monitoring what's going on. And if you aren't doing that, then we're not paying attention to where we are with this. It's actually so all these things, in my experience, in just the hundreds of due process hearings that I've been involved in just in the past 5 years, what I'm seeing is districts are writing good IEPs, but then they're putting them on the shelf and not monitoring what's going on. And so we'll talk more about that in a second, because I have this here, right? This is an attorney who just retired. She was an attorney in Virginia, but what she said, when I have a school district with a FAPE case, the first thing I do is go to the teacher and say, give me the information on your student's progress. The teacher doesn't have any data, I advise the school district to settle. And I'm doing the same thing, is if you don't have data, you don't have an understanding of what's supposed to be going on with this kid. So keep this in mind as talk about this. Implementation, okay? The third part, we talked about the procedures, talked about the substantive, now let's talk about the implementation. The IEP is like a contract. It's a binding commitment and provides notice to both parties as to what services will be provided to a student. It's not like a contract in that you're not promising that there will be something delivered, but it's promising that these things will be there for the child. So keep that in mind as we talk about this and we address this, okay? Implementation, right? The PLAF statement in light of this child's circumstances, the adequacy of an IEP turns on the unique circumstances of the child for whom it was created. The I of the IEP absolutely stands for something. And I can't emphasize enough that the IEP you need to focus on. And it must be a comprehensive evaluation, and the IEP is constructed only after careful consideration of the present levels, things like this, okay? So class statements, make sure, because this drives everything. It identifies the student's needs, identifies the why of special education. Why does this child need special education? Go to the two-part test that you see in the Commonwealth's evaluation, or three-part test you see in the Commonwealth's evaluation, but basically the two parts there. starting point for or baseline for services. It drives the goals and is essential to monitoring progress. Because without this, you don't have it. You have no sense of a program. I'm working with a district. I've heard of a district. I'm not working with this district right now. I used to work with them, where they're placing kids in special education before the IEP is complete. And so the child is starting to receive services. We have no sense of, first, is the child really eligible? Second, we don't know what the child should be working on based on the needs that are identified as part of the initial evaluation report. And third, the parents have not signed a NORP agreeing to the level of services. So when the district contacted me about this and asking, is this a good idea? Where do you think I stood on that one? So I'll let you guess. All right, more. Good PLAF statements. Okay. Good PLAF statements, just aggregate this. And if anyone is interested in a really good statement, information on good PLAF statements, I'll share my email address with you, and I'll happily send this to you, and I'll send it to Sarah and Ethan. But I did an article for the journal Teaching Exceptional Children that just came out a few months ago on writing good PLAF statements. I did it in conjunction with 2 school psychologists in Chambersburg Area School District, and it really talks effectively about this, but I'll make sure that you have access to that document. But it really does highlight where we are with this. It has a paragraph describing the students, description of the student's strengths, needs. How does a student compare to others in the classroom? This is something we often forget, how the student compares to others, so keep that in mind. And the behavioral information, parents report, teacher report, you can see this, and you'll have access to this. So I'm flowing through this a little fast now because I want to show you some graphs. It's going to take me a few minutes because I want to get to the goals. Okay. The measurable end goals is to estimate what a student may accomplish in a year's time. Some of you have heard me say this before, is the ability of a special education teacher when they're writing a measurable annual goal is you are predicting the future. You are predicting the future about what should be covered over this next year. And so what you reasonably expect about this. Now I'll come back to this in a minute, but goals should include academic and functional areas. Please, please, please include functional areas as a part of this. And they directed specifically to the student's needs and not to the student's disability label. I too often see IEPs where we focus on the disability label, what a kid with a learning disability should get or what a kid with autism should get. Nope, I wanted to address to this kid's individual needs. The labels, they don't tell me what the kid's needs are. And if you tell me that all kids with LD get this, I'll show you dozens of kids who don't. If you tell me that all kids with autism need this, I'll show you dozens who don't. So keep this in mind. It needs to be addressed to the individual needs of the child, not the individual needs of a child's label. Keep that in mind as we talk about this, because I too often see districts get caught up on all LD kids get this. That's not the case. Pay attention to the needs. Okay, more. Make sure that, and this is not new. I'm just going to highlight this for you. And this actually comes from the business world. This is not a special ed thing. The business world has been using this for years, sometimes effectively, sometimes not effectively. But it needs to be, the measurable annual goals need to be specific, measurable, ambitious, reasonable, and time limited, and very precise by this. Keep this in mind as we talk about this and pay attention to this. So let me hit specific real fast and talk. Well, why should goals be specific? All right. First, the goals must address the academic and functional needs in the PLAF. Absolutely. And many of you, as over the years, you've seen that PLAF statements are getting much larger, but that drives everything. You can't make a placement decision without a PLAF. You can't make a programming decision without a PLAF. You can't make any decision without this. Second, goals provide a mechanism for determining if a student is making progress in his or her special education program. With that's our ultimate thing, is the child making progress in his or her curriculum. And so keep this in mind. And last, if goals are not specific, they're not reasonably calculated to enable the student to make progress. So we just basically say, hey, we want to improve a child's reading. What the heck does that mean? And I see goals like that. I see goals where kid will improve skills. I truly saw that. The kid will improve skills 80% of the time. What does that mean? 20% of the time, the kid does not have to have skills. So I keep this in mind. More measurable, okay? The IDEA requirement amendments of 1990, goals for the first time were required to be measurable. Some of you have been working on this. Some of you don't remember in 1990, just shut up, okay? If goals are not measurable or not measured, but you cannot show student progress. So think about this. When parents are concerned, as they rightly should be, as when a parent is rightly concerned about the program for their child, if you put them forth in front of them a goal that you can't tell me if it's measurable or you can't tell me if the child has made progress, as a parent, I would truly be concerned about what's going on. Keep that in mind as we address this. Ambitious. The essential function of the IEP is to set out a plan for pursuing academic and functional advancement. Functional, keep that in mind, to make sure that the IEP is reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress. Keep that in mind as we talk about this. And are realistic. Although our goals should be ambitious, we must set reasonable goals that are based on the IEP team's best estimate prediction, bet about a student's potential for growth. Keep that in mind as we pay attention to this, all right? And last, why should goals be time limited? Because the IDEA requires it. I mean, that's not a thing, but it gives you some sense about this. It gives some sense about where we should be going with this. And it gives you a sense of how long this is going to go. And I mean, some of you, think about where you were 1 year ago today. 1 year ago today, there was some hints of this. I was traveling, actually. I was traveling 1 year ago today. Things were very different than they are now. We've learned a lot. So keep this in mind. So how to write a measurable goal. Okay, you come up with a target behavior. What is the observable skill or behavior to be performed based on the present levels? What is the relevant stimulus condition? Under what conditions will the student perform the targeted behavior? Third, the criteria for acceptable performance. Student demonstrates achievement of the goal. And I'm going to get to some graphs just in a minute to show you this. But my favorite one needs to be a reasonable acceptable level of performance. Not the one where I saw, and I truly saw this, is the student will cross the street effectively 80% of the time. I'm not sure what happens on those 20% when they're not quite meeting their goal, but that's beside the point. And last, the timeline, the expected date and when that the goal will be met. These are important to part this. Keep that in mind as we address this. More. Monitor student progress. The IEP process ensures that parents and school representatives fully air their respective opinions on the degree of progress a child's IEP should pursue. Pay close attention to parents. Honor the parents. Listen to the parents. They know a lot, and we in education often don't pay enough attention to them. Please honor them, respect them, and pay attention to what's going on. Okay, so you need to make sure that you've paid attention to the parents, but you need to be able to clarify precisely what's going on is about this. All right, so the last thing, and you've heard me say this before, and I'm going to go on a quick rant for this. It's not a long-winded rant. All right, the importance of reacting to data. When progress reports and other data do not reflect that an annual goal will be met, make needed instructional changes. Change something. Change the grouping, change the structure, change the seating, change the reading level, change the reading amount of time, change something, and then document that. And if that's not working 3 weeks later, change it, change something else. If that's not working, change something else. If that's not working, change something else. I would love it. I would so love it if the first change that we make for a child works. I would absolutely love that, but you understand that that's not always the case. So keep that in mind as we talk about this. All right, keep that in mind as we address this. All right, so my graphs. All right, here are my graphs. Right, and so I've been learning. I've only got two. This is not the kid's real name. This is as you can see, little Justin. This Canadian's got some problems. What's interesting about this is what the IEP team looked at: his reading comprehension. They only had 4 data points because they only assessed the child 4 times in the whole year. And so you can see at the end of the first marking period, the kid was little Justin was at the 60. It was getting 65%. His goal was to get him to 80. This kid did not meet his goal, but they only assessed him 4 times. They only assessed him 1 time per marking period. If you come to me and when you ask me to review your information, determine whether it's appropriate, and all you've got are data points 1 time per year, you don't have enough assessment data to tell me a trend line. So so it's yes. So for that one trend line for 65, at that time, you can tell me if that trend was going up or down. So keep this in mind as we talk about this. So you need to get multiple data points per marking period. Yes, you can aggregate it. You absolutely can aggregate it into something like this for the end of the year report, but this is all they had. So please, please, please do not do this. My next graph, this is even worse, okay? Little Justin, again, same Canadian, things like this, was making calculations, things like this. At the end of the first marking period, they were working on what's called the dollar up method, where the kid was put something in front of him. Something cost $3.85, and he was supposed to tell what the next dollar amount was for this. So if $3.85, the next dollar amount is 4. For those of you who've taken a break from math for the afternoon, but look at this. This is his percent correct during the first and second marking period. He was at the 0%, and the second marking period, he's at the 5%. So look at this. So his goal was to get to 80%. He is nowhere near this. He's nowhere near this. And to let you know, first, this little Justin here, okay? Justin had, get this, significant behavior problems in math. Significant behavior problems in math. And why I say this is that he had significant behavior problems is it was just things were not working for him. When I say things weren't working for him, when he was like the second marking period, he was at the 5%. He was getting 95% of the problems wrong. The district did nothing to alter his curriculum, did nothing to change his curriculum. They did nothing to ensure they talk about the pre-skills, and they did nothing to address the behaviors as part of either looking at an FBA or altering something to rely on this. Okay. Now the district's holding up that he's getting up to the 50th percentile. He's been working on the same skill all year, and they only assess. Yes, this is an aggregate graph as opposed to the other one. This is an aggregate of the points during each marking period, but he's still significantly behind where he's supposed to be. So he did not make progress on his goals. They did nothing to change him, and his behaviors got significantly worse. This kid was spending an enormous amount of time in school suspension. So it posed some significant problems about whether he was going to actually make it or what's going on. The district was saying, we can defend this. He's making progress. He did not meet his goal. They don't have a behavior plan for a child who is having significant behavior problems. They did nothing other than do the same goal month in, month out with this child. So I would say, if you do the same goal month in, month out, I would hope that you would make some progress. But that's something we need to pay attention to. So keep that in mind as we talk about this. So these are just some basic, simple graphs. So developing an IEP is hard, right? But what I said, and again, make sure that you pay attention to the student's academic progress, and you pay attention to where we're going with this, okay? And so we're paying attention to where we are with this, and we pay attention to what's going on. Keep this in mind, okay? So I'm going to skip down because I'm getting long-winded, but I'm going to skip down to first, you can see this. IEPs must be internally consistent. What do I mean by this? Is the PLAF statement leads to the measurable goals, which leads to the special education services, which leads to the monitoring of the progress. Pay attention very closely to your PLAF statement. There are some other notes which I will include as part of the notes that will be provided for you. And so I do want to recommend this as a part of where we're going with this. But so please do look at those. But the PLAF drives everything. And last, I have some great resources. These are great resources. There are 2 IRIS modules on IEP development, one for teachers, of which I wrote about 40%, and then one for administrators, which I wrote about 90% of that module. The Center for Intensive Intervention has a great information for teachers and administrators. The Progress Center, which is a new thing, which I highly recommend that you spend an enormous amount of time starting in about 6 months. It's going to be really, truly amazing. And the Council for Exceptional Children, which has this annual international conference going on as well, has great resources too. And then the journal Teaching Exceptional Children had a special issue on IEPs that came out just this past summer. And I co-edited that special issue. And that's one of the issues, one of the articles that I have on present levels, which I'm going to provide for you guys so that you have that as a basis. I will also provide an article on writing measurable goals that I also worked on. So I'll put that in there too. So if you're looking for additional information, it's good. I would recommend this. If you're looking for information for teachers, you're looking for teacher information to help them guide for like in-services, I would go to the IRIS modules. There are 2 IRIS modules. They're free. They're great. They're wonderful. And they have the US Department of Education stamp of approval. When we wrote them, they went through 7 layers of attorney vetting to make sure that they said exactly what was supposed to be going. So I would go choose to IRIS modules and type in IEP and look at those things, okay? And the last, here's my contact information. Need information about how to contact me. I also post, this is free, Sped Law blog, and my Twitter, Sped Law blog, and thank you. So I see there maybe is a question, Sarah.
Yeah, so I'll pose them to both you and Dr. Smith. Lots of questions about just, as you've mentioned several times, the considerations that we've been living in over the past year, from the angle of making that contact with parents when you haven't seen them in over a year, and it's hard to make that contact, but also especially with progress monitoring and collecting good data when you're not physically with your student, maybe because you are hybrid or because you've been completely virtual for so long.
So the first thing is you need to make really good attempts at including the parents in everything. And I apologize for jumping in front of you, Sean, but I'm on a roll. So it's interesting about this.
Take your time, David. I expected with those questions. Let's take a few minutes on this. Yep. 100%.
Yeah. Okay. So, so the parents, you need to make really good attempts at this. Is it calling them? Is it texting them? Is it? So I'm seeing special ed directors actually going to parents' houses and having meetings in the front yards of parents' yards or apartment complexes to make sure that they're actually truly involving the parents. You need to be able to defend that you've actually made a good faith attempt to truly involve the parents as a part of this, because the parents are valuable. The parents bring great information in this. So so it's going that extra mile or kilometer, depending on where you live in Pennsylvania, that you're doing this. So the progress monitoring data, most of the schools are starting to open up. It's going to be easier to get progress monitoring data, but yes, take whatever data that you can. The important part about data is you have to think about data as series of snapshots, repeated snapshots. Don't think about them as long videos. I think I alluded to this when we were talking with Ganelle Angelo last month. We were talking about ESY determinations, is that we have to think about just continually, repeatedly taking snapshot data about what's going on with this child. So a brief little assessment, a 5-minute thing here, a 7-minute thing there, repeated things like this, and use that to help then inform decisions, right? So I think that helps a little bit with those. I'll be happy to be part of the office hours next week and generate some as more questions are generated. Okay.
Let me piggyback on that. So good afternoon, everybody. And so I'm going to pop in here real quick and share with you a few resources to consider. So first of all, I'm kind of going to go over what I wanted to share, but with the assessment aspect, and we've talked about this in previous sessions if you've been with us, but elements that I would urge us to consider with the progress monitoring. First of all, what's sitting in our content management systems? If we've used anything like Khan Academy or anything where the content management system, of course, is the lessons were already created, IXL, things of that nature. What type of data is being collected there in that dashboard that we could then not only write into these IEPs that we're developing going forward? And by the way, folks, even if we're going to go face-to-face, I think there's some nice features in our content management systems that are collecting data for us that if they align to our goal and benchmark, they're robust, they're dashboard based, and they can be used in addition to other elements we might be going with when we go back to face-to-face or as we're transitioning back to face-to-face. For those of us not using content management systems, a number of us, of course, are using our learning management systems. So be it Seesaw, be it Google Classroom, and a host of other things. If we can create, which we can in our learning management systems, formative assessments, many of them are there. Google Forms is a perfect example in Google Classroom. Again, we can create progress monitoring components there that with the dashboard system that sits within many of these learning management systems. It's actually hard to find a learning management system that doesn't have a dashboard system with their assessment that then allows itself to align with the progress monitoring for that IEP. It would be thoughtfully thinking about some of these tools as we're writing about these IEPs going forward, or thoughtfully thinking about some of these tools with the IEPs we currently have. In addition, there's a number of different formative assessment tools. Now, I have a deck here, lots of slides. Universal Design for Learning, of course, I got to mention it because I just have to mention it. We probably have been designing our assessments differently this year because of the virtual learning. We've given a lot more options. We've used a lot of more different rubrics. Well, what have they created in terms of product that can also be assistance, not so much with the progress monitoring, but as evidence of their growth specific to our goals and benchmarks? So for example, regularly, we were doing this pre-pandemic with my son years ago, and it was an ongoing, and it's a speech and language. The speech and language, we have videotaped. We have videotape of his practicing. We have videotape of his growth. We have videotape of his enunciation, fluency, articulation, etc. And we have stored that, and that is shared back to the team about how he's making progress. But there we can use that as evidence in terms of, we can then observe if we needed to score that from any type of tool we're using as a speech and language pathologist to show that progress monitoring over time as well. So all we're doing is asking the individual to record and then share. And of course, we've all become so much more proficient with video, not only the educators that we are, but also the families and students that we're working with. All right, so I'm going to skip through a lot of these slides here, folks, because I'm mentioning things. So Google Forms offers a lot of progress monitoring features. There's a site, a center called, well, it's out now off the National Intervention Center, but the Progress Monitoring Tool holds a whole library of progress monitoring tools that are available that are digital. Many of us are using. If not, click here when you have an opportunity, and it'll take you to a list of tools out there and how they can be used for a variety of different areas, grade level as well. And then, of course, there's a number of tools like this one's a writing tool, is a hyperlink here to go get more information, which will actually score writing, narrative, persuasive, and argumentative. Sorry, I want to say so much, so I'm going to slow down, say less, say it clearer. But there's a number of tools out there like this that will collect that data automatically for you. So I'd urge you to look at some of these technology tools that we've been using that have been coming across as our list that can collect the data that we need, and then, of course, then connect it back to our IEPs. And of course, once we have that data, there's great ways of using that data in data walks. There's great ways of supporting our students to understand where we're going, where we've been. There's great ways of visualizing that data to help with the instructional engagement, and there's a host of other things we can do with that data when we have it beyond the IEP aspect. All right, and then, of course, rubrics should be our friend as well for some of that data collection, because then it gives options in terms of not only what we can collect, but also, of course, giving direction, pathways to the learner in terms of what our expectations are, and a host of other things. Now, the rest of this slide deck offers all sorts of different information in terms of everything from creating rubrics, but also a series of things for formative assessments, apps to collect for formative assessments, ways to use the formative assessments, which would align nicely with the progress monitoring component. So I want to emphasize that, but I'm going to get us a little dizzy. I'm going to go backwards a bit because I want to get back here too. I apologize. Yeah, a lot of slides. And by the way, a lot of these slides are hyperlinked to resources, and that's why I create them the way I do. But I also want to emphasize some things that David was referring to that I think has really altered this IEP experience. And many of us, I know, a lot of challenges, but I'm going to do some silver lining. Many of us have been using a variety of different tools to be able to access that family. And I see a series of questions, still the difficulty about accessing and connecting with those families. I appreciate that, being a family member myself. My son has Down syndrome. But the aspect of being able to now, with those tools, reflect as we're going into this IEP season. If we've been using these tools throughout the year and we are connecting, the fact that we can share the screen, as I'm doing right now in this Zoom call, the fact that we can maybe organize some breakout rooms if we need to problem solve some things, the fact that it can be recorded, the fact that we can be chatting back and forth with team members as we're trying to problem solve things, utilize those tools to make this more fluid, to make this more interactive, to make this more informative, etc. There's so many different elements here with the digital nature of IEP meetings for us to consider. The other thing is with all the digital tools we've been using throughout the academic year, and of course, we're still learning and we're still trying to strut through it, but there's great ways to be able to use some of that digital material to not only prep, and that would be engaging, of course, ourselves, but also in terms of resources for the meeting, information about our child, information about what we've seen, in the home environment, but also what we've been trying to do as educators, maybe some things we've been able to record. And of course, we work with the Davids of the world to make sure what's appropriate to record and what's inappropriate to record, where we store those recordings. But that would also allow for not only the evidence that people are asking for, but also for the conversations we want to have and the planning. We have more information, we have more illustrations, we may have more of an understanding of where the child is based on what what David was saying in terms of his present level. It's so critical there. Wouldn't that be great to use some of those digital tools we've been utilizing to further illustrate that, especially in what's happening at this, the home environment? And part of that might be having to direct the home environment and what to collect in preparation for. And that would be a great way to engage in the home environment, the adult and the environment, the family member, to assist, to better communicate, to better interact with. The other thing we can do within these digital tools for this IEP meeting as we go forward in terms of planning for that year, we can share everything from work products from the past to the learning environment we're moving into, to illustrations of what the teacher student has been doing, where the challenges have been, some representation for it. You know, a picture is what? Worth 1,000 words. To be able to illustrate where the challenge has been, to then be able to say, we need some solutions. It cuts through the chase, cuts through any potential tension, any type of challenge there that often happens in, wait, is this truly happening? We have that visual illustration, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that visual, video, images, pictures, things of that nature. We also have an opportunity potentially to further support in respect to the goals and benchmarks. To me, it's also the way we traditionally plan to create this, the draft of the IEP. We can engage and communicate with a variety of different individuals, potentially a little bit quicker, get at the information we need, get the data we need a little bit quicker. Now, there's one process I want to emphasize, and I am running out of time, is it also frees us up for time for problem solving with the entire team there for a short period of time. And potentially because of the technology, we're much more flexible to be able to sign into one meeting, sign into another. We don't have to hop in the car. We don't have to get to one school to another as a related service personnel, et cetera, et cetera. We can actually potentially consider things like the MAP process. And if you're unfamiliar with the MAP process, I have a hyperlink here to a rich video that illustrates it, but it's a great way of getting folks around a table, a virtual table, to share about the child, to plan for the child in a very meaningful way. It still gets to the goals, still gets to the benchmarks, still gets to the outcomes you want, but it does so in a much more interactive and a collaborative manner. So I want to reinforce that as a consideration. There's an image of my own son's back when he was in 4th grade, his map visual that really led to a broad and deep conversation all within about 40 minutes for an IEP meeting. So that's a conversation we have later on. But also, finally, for me, these digital connections, you know, again, we use video updates. A member can't be there of the team, and not maybe it's an additional member, maybe it's one of the general education teachers. It's someone that doesn't need to be required, but wouldn't it be awesome because they see our sons or our daughters or the children we serve? They could videotape. They could give an examples. The students, again, could be videotaped examples, like I mentioned with a speech with Nolan. Illustrations in terms of images of what we're trying to do. Illustrations, examples of what's been happening in the instructional, behavioral, social, and emotional that we could also visualize to further benefit an understanding where the child is, benefit of what we need to be doing for the IEP meeting, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not giving this justice, but I just see this as a silver lining with the use of these technologies. And it could be some of us are face-to-face, some of us are remote. Even if we're all face-to-face, some of these supports that we could be utilizing. And then finally, for me, that regular communication is another potential. And I know several of you are talking about the difficulty connecting with the family home. But to me, with the digital technologies we have, with the learning management system we're using, I have regular access to my daughter's performance that I did not have in the years past because of the learning management system. I'm getting reminders this year that I never received in the years past. I have an opportunity to get to Zoom Hangouts or their WebEx Hangouts in our school district that I never had access to in the past. Utilizing those are actually opening up communication for me on my phone, on my computer, in a manner that I never had access to previously. So consider using those. So this becomes not just simply an annual event, but that interaction and prep and the conversation can actually go out throughout the rest of the year. I'm going to stop sharing. I've run out of time. I'm going to actually put up my email address again. Well, that's on my slide. You can take a look at your leisure. And I'll leave it back to Ethan and to Sarah to take us out, and or any questions for David.
Oh my goodness. For folks that placed questions in a Q&A that maybe we didn't get to, please know that we are, oops, wrong slide. Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for the catch. Ethan, if you'll pop up that slide for me, buddy, go for it. For those of you that didn't quite get your questions addressed, we have made note of those so that we can address those maybe in our shared notes. As David mentioned, we do have technical assistance office hours this coming Tuesday afternoon. The information and the Zoom link for that is also available in the shared notes. And there may be some things worth addressing and revisiting in our April session. So we'll be right back here in just a few weeks on April 8th for our next monthly webinar. And who knows, maybe we can get into some more about goal writing or SDIs and the like. So I just wanted to let everyone know that just in case we didn't get to fully address your question, we have made note of it, and we'll be sure to provide all of the resources mentioned and alluded to, linked in the shared notes, and many more. So bookmark that and revisit that later this week, and you'll have a whole treasure chest full of material to look for.